So you guys know about a bunch of this stuff. Things about some of these slides, they're going to tell you operational impact, right? So here it's telling you 11 to 50% per month in worst cases, right? So we always go off the worst case scenario, so we have better planning purposes. Here it tells you P. falciparum, one of the 7 days hospitalization. Why? Because P. falciparum is the worst one. Guys remember that aspect of malaria? Okay, risks. Right? It's the Anopheles female mosquito. Anopheles female mosquito that bites you, that spreads malaria from person to person. Okay? It is a dusk to dawn biter, right? So it bites mostly at night. So you're usually asleep during that time period. Make sure you use your bed netting that they give you. There's a bunch of subtypes. Location, really a big deal, depends on which type of malaria you get, right? That bivaxo valley, malaria, MLSE, all those other kinds of malarias, right? Here, suspected or confirmed malaria, especially P. falciparum, right? Generally, we would consider medical emergency, right? Why would we consider P. falciparum a medical emergency? You guys remember why it's so bad? You what?
It makes the red blood cell practice.
Okay. It's got the autoadhesion, right? It's got the little sticky stuff. Okay, what else?
Attacks red blood cells at all stages, and the fevers are more prolonged.
Correct. The big one, right? The big one is, aside the auto sticky stuff, which really makes it one of the worst ones, right? Because it can stick to any vessel, block up organs, it can cause multiple organ failure. But it's time hack, fractures, it ruptures all your red blood cells, but it attacks every red blood cell at every stage, unlike some of the other ones where only attack more than mature red blood cells. This one does them all across the board, leading to some anemia issues. So understand that P. falciparum is the worst one, right? Should go without being said that prevention of malaria is preferable to treatment, right? Because we are talking public health, and when we did talk ID, if you can prevent people from getting malaria, then let's try to do that. Right? So globally, there's about 249 million clinical episodes of malaria. About 608,000 of those people actually died from malaria, right? And those are 2022 stats from the CDC. So pretty big numbers of people that are actually dying from this stuff, right? So if we can prevent our folks from getting this, by all means, let's do that. Okay? And here it's just telling you that it's fatal. Treatment is delayed. The bottom there says certain medications not used in the United States, often for safety reasons, may be widely available overseas. So when you are overseas, you may have other types of medication that maybe work for malaria, but we have to be careful with what we use. There's a reason why we don't use it here in the States. Okay? You guys remember how often that thing breaks? Every 48 hours, right? P. falciparum, every 48 hours. It could be a little bit up and down, but on standard, on average, it's every 48 hours. Here's the other ones: falciparum, vivax, ovalium, malaria, and MLSE. Okay, things to remember: falciparum's the worst one. We just mentioned that, and then you have vivax and ovalium, which have the dormant stage or latent stage. Remember we talked about that definition a little earlier, right? So keep in mind those two are the only two that have a dormant or latent stage, which means they can affect you when they initially hit you, right? Within their little incubation period, they may start causing you malaria, or they may just hang out, be dormant, and not bother you for weeks to months to years. Okay? Things to remember. In some cases, vivax and ovalium have been known to when we don't do terminal prophylaxis, have been known to affect folks in between times before somebody figures out that that's what they got. So high index of suspicion for some of these things, especially location. If they are in a location where Ryebacks and O'Malley are endemic, right? Friendly little mosquitoes, yes. You have the Aedes, you have the Culex, and you have the Anopheles. The Anopheles female is the one that actually spreads stuff to us, right? And it's usually female mosquitoes that cause the problem, because female mosquitoes need the blood that we take from us to feed their eggs. Okay? Generally, the males usually will go feed on nectar. They usually do not spread the stuff to us. Usually it's the female mosquitoes. Okay? So the Aedes, the one in the middle, causes chikungunya. That's the one that causes dengue and yellow fever and Zika. Right? The Anopheles, that's the one that causes malaria for us. It also causes Eastern and Western equine syndrome, encephalitis. And then the Culex, that one is the one that's associated with West Nile, or Japanese encephalitis. Here's some of the signs and symptoms of malaria. You guys should be aware: fevers, triggers, chills, rigors, sweats, headaches, nausea, vomiting. Nothing big, right? That's that hot, cold, sweaty cycle that you get as each of the red blood cells are getting ready to rupture, right? You go through that hot, cold, sweat cycle for stages. And then remember, each one has its own little stage. Falciparum every 48 hours, Ryebacks and O'Malley 48 hours, and malaria every 72 hours. This is just talking about, well, at least the initial ones are good. We're talking about the blood stages, right? It gets into your body, gets into your hepatocytes. They rupture out from your hepatocytes, make it into your red blood cells, or into your bloodstream. They find red blood cells, get into your red blood cells, continue to propagate. Then they get too big for the red blood cell, and then they rupture it. If it's falciparum, it has that little sticky stuff, which really causes problems in all your vessels. Problems in all your organs, problems in your brain, cerebral malaria. So falciparum is the worst one. Here it tells you classic periodic fever related, right? So we remember that wave of fevers every 48 hours versus every 72 hours for which ones. And then down at the bottom there it says multiple infections can lead to temporary immunity. Understand that this does not give you lifelong immunity. You get it. It may be okay for a couple of months after, right? You're still protected. And then if you leave and then you come back, you can still get it again. That's all we're talking about here. Nothing different. The expectation is that you use protection, right? Preventative is key, not just for ID, but when we talk about public health, we talk about all your soldiers, right? Everybody that you need to take care of, right? Public health deals with population. So population-wise, the Army gives us these high-speed little uniforms that are embedded with permethrin, right? Supposed to use those for prevention. They give us DEET, use that on the exposed skin. Make sure you wear your uniform appropriately, right? The sleeves down, kind of lays down, cover as much skin as you can. And then, has anybody ever used their sleep net? No? Yes, I use it in Afghanistan quite a few times because things are rough. So use what they give you. Use what they give you. Right? Give it to you for a reason. The problem with that is that you have to expound that onto your individual soldiers. Right? Because this way it keeps them from getting sick and it keeps them from having to come see you. Right? It keeps them mission oriented so that they have that body to go do whatever they need to do. What I need you to understand from this slide is that permethrin is an insecticide. Permethrin is an insecticide. Okay? Doesn't change the color of the uniform, doesn't change your IR status of the uniform. It's odorless and it's not irritating. That's why we can wear it on our bodies and it doesn't mess up with our skin. Okay? Overall, at the bottom here, it tells you it prevents mosquito bites through fabric and by repelling and killing. Okay? It's an insecticide, so it kills whatever insect gets on this thing. Alright? That's one. This is one of the things that we use to prevent it. It is an insecticide. Versus DEET. Okay? You've got two pictures there. The little green one is a picture that we get. Right? Comes in a box of 12. So when you people are ordering this stuff, you go down range, do the number. One box equals 12 of these. And you know how many body you got? Do the math. The one on the left is called Ultrathon. It's the same exact thing. The one on the left is a commercial. You can go to the store and buy this. They're both made by 3M. So it doesn't matter. Packaging looks different, but it's the exact same thing. 33% D. Alright. Here's a nice thing. I kind of like Consumer Reports. I think they're unbiased when you do some of their things. In 2000 and 2003, Consumer Reports did a comparison of DEET with some of the other insect repellents that are out there, and DEET-1, 33% DEET. This one right here, Ultrathon, or the little green thing that we usually get in the military, was number one. Okay. So as it stands right now, insect repellent. It tells you right there on the little label there. Insect repellent, not insecticide. Okay. 33% DEET. This thing usually lasts about 12 hours. Okay? When you apply it to your bare skin, usually lasts about 12 hours depending upon what you do. You're out there sweating, doing a whole bunch of stuff, may last less. But on average, it usually lasts about 12 hours. This is what we call a vapor active repellent. Vapor active repellents do not kill bugs. They repel bugs. Okay? It releases a slight vapor across your skin where the bugs come, feel it, and then fly off. Okay? So there's a difference between the DEET, which is a vapor active repellent, versus permethrin, which is actually an insecticide. They do two different things. Okay? So here's the repels, it does not kill. Biting mosquitoes, ticks, jitters, fleas. And so it does protect you from quite a few different things. And here it tells you you can apply it with camouflage face paint if you need to. Just make sure you apply the DEET first and then the face paint. And then if you're going to use it with sunscreen, it's the opposite. You apply the sunscreen first and then you apply it. And then there at the bottom it tells you there's some combination of sunscreen and DEET available, but they're at 20% strength, not 33% strength. Just remember that this one is a vapor active repellent. It does not kill, it just repels. Okay? Chemoprophylaxis. None of the chemoprophylaxis that we talked about is 100%. Even the PrEP stuff for HIV is still not 100%. Okay? In this case, we're talking malaria. Right? So whether we give doxy, quinine, Malarone, whatever, may or may not protect you. Okay? 100% of the time. But that is what we have. Understand the difference where we say has a short half-life and has a longer half-life. Right? The ones that we take every single day obviously have a shorter half-life, which is why we have to take them every single day, versus the ones that have the longer half-life, which are usually the ones that we take once a week. Right? So that's based on the medication that you're actually using or going to prescribe. Right? Use of the same or related drugs that have been taken for prophylaxis is not recommended for treatment. Why? The main reason why we don't do that, right? We talked about this during malaria. Right? Obviously, the medication for prophylaxis did not work. So using the same medication for prophylaxis as part of treatment, probably not the best thing we do. Right? We always have better meds than we can always do. And travelers should strongly be discouraged from obtaining medications for chemoprophylaxis or treatment while abroad. Right? This is where we get back to the U.S. has an FDA. The FDA actually oversees all prescription medications. They do not oversee herbal medications or any of those things that are not prescription based. Okay? Overseas, they don't necessarily have that, which means even if you get some Cipro from overseas, you may not be getting 100% Cipro from overseas. Sometimes they use a lot of other fillers and they're not actually getting what you're paying for. Okay? So you gotta be careful with getting medications overseas. Generally don't do that. Okay, dengue fever. You guys remember this thing? It has 4 serotypes. Right? Never give anybody a vaccine for dengue fever if they've never had dengue fever in the past. Right? 11 to 50% worst case scenarios for dengue. Okay? Hospitalization is required. We don't really have any specific treatment for this thing, so vaccination, if at all possible, best thing we can do. If they've already had it. If they have not had dengue, we do not give vaccine for dengue. You guys remember why? No? Okay. If I give you a vaccine for dengue right now, and you go to a dengue endemic area, your body is going to think you've already had dengue. Right? And the problem with dengue is, the first time, you may be okay. Your body will develop some stuff. You'll be all right. The second time, on the other hand, if you get dengue, that's when you start having those hemorrhagic problems, leading to HUS, right? Hemorrhagic uremic syndrome, DIC, right? So your second time around with dengue is usually, and any time after, can lead you to severe dengue. Problem with giving you that vaccine first is going to make your body think that you're having another dengue attack. It puts you at a higher possibility of getting severe dengue. That's usually why we don't give folks vaccines unless they've already had dengue before. In the U.S., FDA has only authorized now, it used to be between 9 and 45, and it's between 9 and 45 overseas, but here in the U.S., they usually do it for ages 9 to 16 in the U.S. More so because usually it's little kids that have this problem, a lot more than adults. Okay. In this case, your primary biter is your Aedes mosquito, Aedes aegypti. Okay. And you have two. You have your Aedes aegypti and you have your Aedes albopictus. Okay. You have two female mosquitoes there that really cause problems. Your Aedes aegypti more common than Aedes albopictus, but nevertheless, it's still an Aedes mosquito. All right, female type. You can see there, these guys usually hang out in urban areas. Right? For our last conflict, this is where we hung out. We hung out in a lot of urban areas. Okay? And there it talks about that re-exposure dramatically increases the risk of dengue hemorrhagic fever. Right? Is one of the main reasons why we don't give the vaccine unless someone has already had dengue before. And we have those 4 subtypes. And remember, you can get any of the 4. Give you, regardless of what you can get, you get a little bit reprieve after that for immunity, and then immunity wanes away, and you can still get it again. All right. Alright, so dengue Viaxia, live attenuated vaccine. Okay, that's your vaccine that these guys use. Alright. World Health Organization recommends it for people ages 9 to 45. Okay, FDA approval for children and adolescents 9 to 16. Generally, we follow the FDA, not the World Health Organization stuff. Right? So for us, it's only technically authorized for 9 to 16 years of age. Okay. Big bold letters, must have confirmed previous dengue virus infection. If you have not had dengue before, you should not get the vaccine. Period. Okay? And that bottom one tells you the exact same thing. Recommendation is only for persons with confirmed dengue virus, prior dengue virus. Okay? That second infection is a higher risk for severity of disease, which is what we don't want. Okay? Now, these will be the urban areas that you'll be in. The problem with a lot of the urban areas is there may be a lot of standing water. Right? If there's a lot of standing water, then there is a breeding ground for mosquitoes. There's a breeding ground for mosquitoes. They're able to come up, bite somebody infected, and then start spreading from person to person. All right? So in those kind of areas, try to make sure that all the standing water is gone. When I would walk around overseas like that, as we did our combat patrols, I had little donuts, and I would just take it. If there was a larger body of standing water, I'd just drop a donut in there until it dropped, till all the water, evaporated away. But in that interim, it was a breeding ground for mosquitoes. Drop a little donut in there, that little donut has the insecticide in there that kills those little eggs, keeping those mosquitoes from catching more mosquitoes. Okay? But that's just me. So try to remove all standing water, if at all possible. Okay? There's a whole bunch of other mosquito-borne diseases, some of which we did not talk about. Chikungunya, right? We look at worst-case scenarios, 11 to 50% operational loss. Rift Valley fever, 2 to 10%. Yellow fever, 2 to 10%. Japanese encephalitis, 1%. And then Zika Aedes, and more to be discovered, right? Because they're still working through Zika with an understanding that Zika just presents as flu-like illness. Usually we get better. And the biggest issue with Zika would be for pregnant folks and spreading it if you're still having intercourse within that specific time period where you may have some of those spirochetes inside your sperm. Right? You guys remember sandflies? That leash, right? That big giant thing that kind of looked like a little pizza that will eventually go away if we talk about the cutaneous version, right? Versus the mucocutaneous version versus the visceral version. Right? Here it tells you can affect 1 to 10% per month in worst case scenarios, which is what we use, worst case scenarios. Sandflies are focal, right? Which means, number one, they don't fly, and they're very low to the ground, and they hop around. So they feed at night while you sleep, with an understanding of some cultures sleep on the ground, they sleep on the floor, which makes their whole body game. It's a sandfly bite. Right? Okay, leash, tuberculosis, and sandfly fever are all caused by sandflies. Tuberculosis is pretty much more so in South America than it is anywhere else. Okay. It usually has 2 phases. It has a fever phase, or the acute phase, which is the fever phase. That's usually like the life-threatening part, the acute part, and then it goes over to the chronic phase, where you'll have like skin eruptions, which eventually go away. The problem with tuberculosis is that if you don't treat, you have mortality rates of 40 to 90%. You don't treat tuberculosis. Sandfly, pretty simple. Sandfly fever, that's easy, self-limiting, presents like flu-like symptoms, but it'll go away on its own. It will cause you a lot of muscle aches and headaches, but that one at least goes away on its own. Anyone who's at the ground level when they're sleeping, or if they're not wearing their boots and their pants all the way down, pant legs all the way down, are liable to get bit. So keep that in mind, right, between location and skin exposure. Okay. Leash, while considered disease of tropics, right? And female sandflies are one that usually does this. Right? And need that blood nutrient to feed their eggs, right? Protection of the bite. That's mostly during the evening hours. A lot of times it's usually when people are sleeping. Okay? And there it tells you it's noiseless, and it's small, and you can see a picture of it down at the bottom with full gut, blood already. Here, use your regular bed nets. Might not be protected. Need insecticide, treated bed nets. Okay? We have no preventive drugs for any of this stuff. And we have no vaccines for any of this stuff. So prevention is key, right? Prevention is key. Ticks. We talk a whole bunch of different things. Right? We talk about a whole bunch of them. Lymes. Right? Here we talk bacteria, viruses, that heartland of Torresi. That heartland. Right? So we're still discovering things. And the reason why I bring up heartland is because that one was just recently discovered in 2009. That's not too long. Right? That's what, 15, 19 years ago. And we're still finding stuff out there. That one is mostly in the Midwest and South U.S. And it's caused by the Lone Star tick. But here, impacts usually about 1% per month in most case scenarios for tick issues. With an understanding that besides Lyme disease, tick issue, right? We don't have any specific treatments for any of these things. Usually you gotta let them play out. Okay? A lot of times you're self-limiting for the most part, but if we can prevent this stuff, let's try to prevent this. Okay? Here's some other vector-borne diseases. Okay? Streptitis, 2 to 10%. Plague, 1%. Okay? What do we need to do? Preventing vector diseases. PPM, protective measures. Right? They give us stuff. We need to use the stuff they give us to hopefully protect us. Right? This is generally our very first line of protection, making sure people are wearing their stuff appropriately. Okay? There it says vector control often impractical. Right? I can't go overseas to a deployment place and say, hey, I'm going to go ahead and spread for all these mosquitoes. Right? I can't go over there and say that I am going to genetically change some mosquitoes so that they can't do any more stuff. Right? So we have to take it upon ourselves to figure out what can we do to help our folks not get sick whenever we go someplace. Right? I mentioned donuts. Donuts are little tiny insecticides that look like donuts. Okay? And we can just drop them into standing water. And it kills the mosquitoes that go in there and it keeps them from breeding. That's one thing that we can do. Right? Do you guys know what that blue stuff is that we put out when we deploy? You know, that kills mosquitoes? I forgot what it's called. It smells nasty. But mosquitoes freaking flies onto it like crazy. Do you remember what the name of that stuff is called? Yeah, I used to use it all the time too. You just take it, put it in like a little cup, or cut the top of a water bottle off, put it in there, and just hang it by a tree, and then go to the little blue stuff, and then they just die. It's another means of control around the area that you're in. You have all this stuff, and you have all this through your logistical channels, so that you can get it and you can use it to try to protect your folks. Okay, in whatever area you live. And understand chemoprophylaxis and vaccines we really don't have. The only we really have stuff for is Lyme's, and that would be that doxy. So if you want to give someone doxy before they go to protect them from Lyme's, it's a little bit different than malaria treatment where it'll be one pill once a day at 100 milligrams. In this case, it'll be one pill once a week 200 milligrams of doxy. And that would be a chemoprophylaxis for Lyme if you really need to. Right? In which case, generally we don't, because where we go, Lyme isn't one of those bigger tick issues. Okay, here's some other diseases that we're going to talk about. In this case, it'll be the water contact diseases. Right? Here we're talking Giardia, we're talking schistosomiasis, we're talking lepto, right? We're talking cryptosporidiasis. Right? So these are some of the ones that we've already talked about during ID. So as you're crossing things, right, you're liable to get some of these things. Okay? So remember, you don't have to drink the water. Right? These things, if they get onto your bare skin, can penetrate your skin. Right? Schisto, lepto. So keep that in mind whenever you're dealing with water stuff. Okay? Lepto specifically, or spirochetes. Right? How do we get lepto? It's transmitted directly through indirect contact with urine or bodily fluid from infected animals, mostly rodent urine. Right? If it gets in the water, if it gets on the soil, wherever you're sleeping at, direct contact will spread to you. Right? Any contact with any of those infected animals, right, can get to primarily rodents. Okay. There's telling you that that's brown rat, most common reservoir. Okay. We are dead-end hosts, so once it gets into us, we're not going to spread it anymore. And we can get sick, but we're not going to have enough to be able to continue to spread it and allow it to propagate. So it stops at us. It makes us sick as heck, but in some cases, not too bad. And it's something. When it's severe, then you have treatment. One of the important pieces for this one, and I don't think we covered this in ID, is this thing is spread through urine, right? So if the urine is alkalytic, then this thing may propagate a lot better, a lot easier within the reservoir. In which case, the reservoir would be that rat. Right? If the urine is more acidic, it kills it, which means it doesn't allow it to continue to propagate as it continues to urine and infect everything around it. So, for acidic urine, kills it. Alkalytic urine allows it to propagate. But that would be more considered towards the reservoir. Okay. Survive for weeks in the right condition. Okay. There's a whole bunch of different conditions. There's if your urine's not acidic, if it's alkaline, it'll live in your urine a lot longer. If you have more acidic, right? pH less than 6, right? 7 is neutral. Kills it, decreases the shedding of the lepto. Operational impact worldwide, effect within 10% per month in worst case scenarios. Usually requires hospitalization if you get the severe kind. Enteric. The enteric kind, right? Because you have anecteric, you have enteric. Remember, the anecteric doesn't cause you jaundice, right? Usually lasts 1 to 2 weeks, self-limiting, goes away. If you have the enteric phase, on the other hand, that's a severe one. It causes jaundice, jacks up your liver, right? Generally, you should be hospitalized. Right? It can lead to azotemia and anemia in some cases, right? Hemorrhagic manifestations. So, keep that in mind. Depends on which one you get. Outbreaks, Hawaii. For the U.S. here, we got Hawaii, Florida, Illinois, okay, Okinawa, Republic of Korea, Guam. Let's remember, 50% of the cases that happen in the United States occur in Hawaii. Okay, 50% of the cases that occur in the United States occur in Hawaii, with an understanding that the number's still not big. Right? 2022, they only had, I think, 51 cases. Okay, 50% of those were in Hawaii. Okay, so keep that in mind. The numbers are not very large. But if we're talking stateside, Hawaii's a big one, right? Lots of rainfall, lots of water, lots of smaller animals. So, okay. What do we do? Preventive measures. limit exposure to infected animals, right? Difficult during deployment because we just don't know. We're gonna go wherever we're gonna go. So, have to keep those things in mind. And here, it's telling you military studies have shown that a single weekly dose of doxy, 200 milligrams, 99% effective, right? That's the same doses that we would give for chemoprophylaxis for mites. Right? And we have the vaccines. Avoid swimming, bathing, or washing in stagnant pools and sluggish streams. All right. I use this example when we talk about these kind of things because, again, I was a NOR PA, like a captain or first lieutenant. Back in the day when deployments were only 6 months long. In this case, we got stuck and went from 6 months to 1 year. So we were stuck there for a year instead of 6 months. We went forward to a place called Nagalam in Afghanistan, and to the right of where we were was a river. What do you think soldiers want to do in a river? They're just hanging out, doing nothing. Hey, can we jump in? Hey, can we go swimming? It's a river, man. You can't go swimming in a river. Right? But it's hot as hell. We're wearing all your gear. Right? Saving grace was the water was not stagnant; it was running. Okay? It was constantly running. It was pretty strong. Okay? And there were some rocks in the way where you could like kind of stand. The water could still pull you, but you know you're still somewhat safe. So you were out there for months at a time. So eventually, it's like, yeah, sure, you guys go in the water, right? My choice, right? Because the commander, pretty cool commander, he's like, hey, Doc, what do you think? Want to let him go in the water? I'm like, hey, you got guys up on the mountaintops, right? Making sure they're covering them, and you can put a guy a little further down to make sure if he gets swept away, that he can get pulled up. Sure, I got doxycycline and I got ciprofloxacin, I think I'm good. So nobody got swept away. That's how we kept cool. That's how we washed our uniforms. But it's going to be your choice whether you're going to allow your folks to do some of this stuff, right? Because a lot of times the commander's going to ask you as a subject matter expert, hey, do you want your guys to go in the water? Yes or no? You don't know what's in that water. Right? But you take care of it. Guys are going to have a little bit better morale being out in the middle of nowhere for months at a time. Hey, sure, whatever. Right? Luckily, nobody got sick. My sample. Right? So if it gets really bad, you got doxy for outpatient, right? That's the mild. If you really need to give them something, you can give them some doxy. But remember, if it does get severe, it becomes icteric. Right? That's one where he has to go to the hospital because it's checking up his liver and it's starting to cause multiple organ damage. Right? He's got to go to the hospital. He needs Pen G. Right? So serve your bodies of water before you actually choose to say yay or nay. Field operations. Hey, we're going to get dirty. We're going to mess with the dirt. It is what it is. Things to remember, right? Breathing in the dust. Now we're talking blasto, histo, coccidio, right? Things to keep in mind when you're in an area where dust stuff blows up, because people can't have respiratory problems, right? Okay, preventing soil disease, to avoid setting up in heavy rodent infested areas. We won't know that. We won't know. Just look around. Sometimes most of the guys just swoosh poop over. I know I've put in some poop before. Hey, it is what it is, right? We carry meds for a reason. If you can do rodent control wherever you're going to be, if you're going to be there for a while, then try to set up some rodent control. The other part of that is field hygiene and sanitation. Make sure that you set up your pee stuff and poop stuff away from where you guys are. Make sure you set up your trash pit away from where you guys are. Because otherwise you're going to attract all those rodents to where people live. Not what you want. Right? Try to make sure that those guys don't eat the MREs where they sleep. Because they're going to have stuff all over there which means you're gonna have rodents come over there while they're sleeping. You have to explain that to them, because half of them, or most of them, will not get it. Okay? And we are trying to get them from getting sick, right? So, okay, we gotta expound on the importance of some of this stuff, right? There it says minimize dust inhalation. When we used to get water delivered, we used to always have those water trucks spill water all over the place so that we keep some of that dust down. Right? Sometimes, even if it keeps it down for a little bit, it does help. But remember, inhaling any of that dust stuff can cause some sort of respiratory issue. All right? Animal contacts. For some of you that are animal lovers, okay, our headquarters tells us we will not have any mascots. We will not take stray dogs in. We will not take stray cats in, unless you're special operations and you get your own little mascot. Okay. Keep that in mind. And I say that because I dealt with some of the special operations guys. They had their little mascots. They brought one mascot over one day because he got hit by a Humvee, and I had to cast up his whole backside because he broke his pelvis. So we had a little mascot with, well, they had a little mascot with little body cast from the waist down. That was kind of cool. But dog survived and started walking okay after we took the cast off. But understand, our headquarters will tell you, no pets, no animals, okay? Your soldiers will get those little puppies and those little dogs and they'll start feeding them by their huts. Okay? I had a first sergeant go around finding them, just shoot them, bam, gone. Okay? Trying to decrease the possibility and spread of disease. Okay? We gotta keep our folks safe. Sometimes our folks don't want to. So we have to make sure that we talk to them, right? What was the world's biggest reason for rabies? Dogs. Okay? Dogs. It was on that little World Health Organization poster that we have for ID. Right? Dogs, number one, rabies, worldwide. A lot of places we go, we have wild packs of dogs that are out there. Not to say that they all have rabies or they're all bad, because we found a lot of good ones. You always feed them and stick to you, and they're always there, but yeah, not what we're supposed to be. Right? Okay. Avoid all strange animals or wild animals, no mascots or pets. Okay. If we're going someplace that we need to immunize somebody for rabies stuff, let's do that. All right, before we go anywhere. Pre-exposure vaccine does not eliminate the need for post-exposure vaccine, right? So even if you do have the vaccine, you will still get 2 more shots, status post. Those guys don't get the immunoglobulin because they don't need it. Right? Remember that piece? Okay. There's a whole bunch of other ones, anthrax, Q fever, brucellosis, or other animal contacts. Remember Q fever was the last one that we talked about. That was crystallization of birth products from sheep, cattle, goats. Right? You can inhale it, or direct contact with the birth products. Right? Those guys usually present with flu-like symptoms. And then you have your brucellosis. We didn't talk about brucellosis. That one is ingestion of unpasteurized milk or cheeses. Right? That's the most common way you can get brucellosis, but you can also inhale it, just like Q fever, from some of those birth products as well. The big thing about brucellosis is that it causes you a lot of bad symptoms. The night sweats is one that causes you, and aside having wave-like fevers, up, down, brucellosis, when you have night sweats, that night sweat smells like wet hay. Completely distinctive than any of the other things that we would normally see. That night sweat smells like wet hay. So very, very distinctive. Okay. Right. STIs. Gonorrhea and chlamydia range 20 to 50%. You will have to educate your people on safe sexual practices. Well, if you remember when I talked to you, or when we talked about STIs, I said, who was comfortable talking about sex? Right? This is one of the reasons why you have to be comfortable talking about this, because you have to talk to your patients about this. A lot of times they are shy. Some people are conservative. Some people don't want to talk about it. Some people, like, yeah, that's taboo stuff. I can't talk to you about this. All right? But sometimes when you give them a little in to mention it, it'll allow them to go ahead and talk to you. Okay? You want to be able to develop that relationship with your patient so that they're comfortable enough to actually talk to you about this stuff. But remember, we want to talk about general population here, so you're going to be informing and talking to all your soldiers, particularly before deployments, to make sure that they do the right thing when they're having their little sexual practices before they go. Rules of engagement, right? We're not supposed to be having sexual or intercourse while we're overseas. Does it happen? Okay. Does it happen? The correct answer is yes. It happens overseas while we are deployed. Right? And we have had people get sent back because they've gotten pregnant. Okay? So we need to make sure that we talk to our folks and have them understand that that is a possibility. All right, let's go ahead and take a break. Now it's bugging me. But those are little things you can just drop in those cans of water. And it'll help with controlling some of the mosquito population wherever you are. Right. So remember, crowded living conditions. Really big things that we're really concerned about crowded living conditions are anything that we can spread respiratory-wise to each other, right? Because if we're all in close quarters, whatever we cough up, we're going to cough up to each other, and other folks are going to inhale, which is what we don't want, in which case we would be spreading stuff to people. The other things that we need to concern ourselves with the overcrowding areas, or if we do run into each other, right, and we do have lice, we can spread the lice around that way as well. So keep that in mind, overcrowding. The other things that we talk about when we talk about overcrowding, and I remember when we first showed up to a place and they're taking over for another unit, there's no space for you, and they jam you all into one space, right? So you'll be sleeping on top of each other. Okay? While you're sleeping on top of each other, you'll be breathing on top of each other as well. So spread of respiratory issues becomes a problem. Keep that in mind. All right. Adenovirus. Right? We have a vaccine for this thing. Generally approved for, I believe it's ages 17 through 50. Right? It had gone away from the market for a while. But here it's telling you that 30 to 70% of trainees are isolated with it. Okay? Before we had vaccines, this was associated 90% with acute pneumonias in brand new recruits. So now that we have a vaccine, as you can see, originally developed Walter Reed, okay, 1956. It's made a few changes since then. The company that actually made it for the military, I think it's West Laboratories, I think. They asked the government for money to, one, advance their labs and grow their labs, two, money for some research to keep advancing the vaccine. The vaccine went all the way out to 1999, as you can see there, from 1971 to 1999. In 1999, they either ran out or the rest of their stock expired. After that, in 2001, they requested funding to reestablish this stuff, in which case they did. They started doing clinical trials again, had to meet regulatory requirements, okay? And then again, with the new vaccine was licensed again in 2011, and that's not on there. But in 2011, we started doing this stuff again for our trainees. All right. Here, preventing respiratory disease, understanding the mode of transmission. They keep for you when you go wherever they send you, right? Trying to mitigate some of the crowded stuff, especially with the respiratory issues. When we're talking sleeping, right? Try to do head to toe. That'll decrease it somewhat. Ventilation. Make sure there's some ventilation in some of those enclosed areas. For hygiene and sanitation, again, make sure all that stuff is away from areas where you sleep and eat. Because we don't want to necessarily bring all those rodents or get that foul smell from those areas. Make sure people are actually washing their hands. Okay. And then if we can, by all means, let's vaccinate before we go wherever we're going to go, based on where we are going to go. Right? Protect your food and water. Make sure you know where it comes from. Don't drink any of the local stuff. Maintain field sanitation and hygiene. Right? You don't want to mix any of that stuff with where you live. If we can figure out how to control some of the insects in those areas, by all means, do that. We can keep the dust down wherever we are, by all means, let's do that. Educate for sexual exposures in animals prior to going, not after you go. Right? And then if you can do vaccines, do vaccines. If we have prophylaxis to whatever issues you may encounter before you go, let's give out the prophylaxis and explain to our soldiers why we are giving it to them and why they should take it. All right. Anybody have any questions? No, yes, maybe? What's next? Foodborne illnesses? Is that what's next? Yeah. Anybody know where that is? No? The pearl, yes. Good, good. That is the pearl. That's a little food court here at the pearl. Good catch. Okay. So here's our terminal learning objectives. And here's some learning objectives. We're going to talk about foodborne stuff. Right? So big ones that really cause some serious problems would be the norovirus, right? Bleeding caused domestically foodborne illness, right? Salmonella, non-typhi, okay? Campylobacter, E. coli. What number did I tell you to remember? E. coli. 015787, right? That's the worst one, right? And then listeria, right? Listeria more so for pregnant and immunocompromised folks, right? So here, foodborne illness, or foodborne disease, your choice, right? Any illness resulting from consumption of contaminated food. Pretty simple, right? The pathogenic bacteria, virus, parasites. Okay? Pretty simple. Nothing really hard. Right? Some cases, some of the food have toxins in it. Right? So those toxins can spread and can continue to cause other problems as well. Generally by either poisonous mushrooms that they have there or by spores that we may ingest, like Bacillus cereus, right? And there it tells you gastrointestinal illness related to stomach or intestinal issues. Great, got it. Not a big thing, right? But remember, all gastrointestinal illnesses don't necessarily have nausea and vomiting, and all gastrointestinal illnesses don't always have diarrhea. Okay? They may have one or the other, but not necessarily all the time. Okay? Hey, look at the back of a little triangle. Right? So we have a causative agent, we have a susceptible person or host, or us, and we have the environment, right? There it's telling you agents that like pathogen or preformed toxin, right? Like that Bacillus cereus makes up. Okay? So for quantity, depending upon the concentration that you ingest, will determine the time and how bad it may get, based on your immune system and your body's reaction to whatever it is you're ingesting. Okay? And then obviously your host would be how susceptible you are. So your agent plus your host plus your environment equals how bad your disease is going to be. Alright? Literally what that means. But here's a whole bunch of stuff. Sources of food, more hazards. Right, you have the soil. Right, so depending upon where the stuff is grown, okay, if it's grown in contaminated soil that carries some pathogens, your food that it grew in may be contaminated. Right? We need to understand where some of this food comes from, right? Especially if it's overseas. Some places overseas use manure. Whose manure? Sometimes your manure as a human, sometimes mostly animal manure to help feed the field. So we need to understand where some of this food comes from in the soil that it's grown in. Right? Water. Where do you think that irrigation water comes from that they use to grow all that food? In some cases, right, when you think about overseas, some of those rivers don't look good. Okay? They are extremely polluted. Okay? Sometimes they carry pathogens. And that's what's going into the field. That's what's going into the soil. Right? Sometimes we have poor ventilation in some of the food facilities and farms where we grow this stuff. So they spread microbial spores. Okay? Some of the food services that have come back that they're sending out. We have harvesting, where if they're using unclean tools, unclean hands, contaminated containers that they're putting everything in, it's going to come back on us. Right? All that stuff is going to come back on us. Right? Some of those live animals, right? Those slaughterhouses, if they're not cleaned appropriately, they can spread bacteria onto your food. Right? If they're not handled appropriately, kept at the appropriate temperature, if the fecal matter gets on them, they're not washed off appropriately. If you have dirty contaminated hides or contaminated meat that makes it out of there, it's going to all come to you as a consumer. You're going to eat. Same deal with the fruits and vegetables, right? Depends on where they're grown, depends on how they're harvested, depends on how they're handled and transported. You can use contaminated water to help them grow. So without going through every single piece here, there are bits and pieces of our logistical chain, depending upon where the food comes from, till it finally makes it to your plate, that it can get infected in any of those locations. There's lots of ways, lots of places that your food can get infected. Right? The big one down there for people and employees, right? Proper hand washing. Right? Sometimes when you go to restaurants here, you'll see a sign, hey, employees must wash their hands. Do I really need a sign to tell that employees must wash their hands again? Right? That goes to training and education of your employees. Right? When they show up, hey, make sure you wash your hands every time you go. All right? If you're sick, don't come to work, right? What happens if you have a sick person in the back making the food? Right? Coughing all over it, coughing into his hand, and then like touching the food. Yeah, right? That's how we spread stuff. So you tell them, if you're sick, don't come to work. One of the bigger issues that we generally see, especially when we talk about public health, and we see like outbreaks, problems, right? GI issues specifically, right? Is what temperature do we keep our foods at on those little buffets? Right? That temperature is not appropriate. If it's kept between 40 and 140, that's a danger zone for food and bacteria, for bacteria growing in food. Right? That's a big one. So education and folks is extremely important. So there's a lot of places. A lot of different spots, levels that can cause sources for some of your food hazards. Here's telling you 1 in 6 Americans become ill for some strange foodborne illness. Okay. 128,000 hospitalized, 3,000 died. Those are generally more the immunocompromised or folks that have a problem with their immune system, but nevertheless, we have 3,000 people that are dying. That's here in the U.S. Okay. So if you look at the bottom one there, causes 20% are known pathogens, 31 pathogens tracked. Okay. So if we know 20% of that, that's about 9.4 million people. Right? With the difference of 80% being about 38.4 or 5 million people, or 6 million people, give or take. Right? That's a lot of people. That's a lot of folks. So keep in mind, this is a big deal. That unspecified one, that one sometimes covers toxins and chemicals or other causes that we don't generally look for. Right? So for that 20%, we have 31 pathogens that we generally track, but for that other 80%, we don't generally track some of those pathogens. So we may not ever know. And a lot of times we don't know because most of the times they're very self-limiting. Right? Bacillus is very self-limiting, rotavirus self-limiting, norovirus very self-limiting. Right? So sometimes we don't track that stuff and we don't catch it. Okay? So here's more spread of food illnesses. A lot of this stuff is some of the things that we just covered in that prior slide as to areas and locations that can spread it, improper handling and preparing and storing the food, improper washing of hands and fingernails. Okay. If you have those big giant long fingernails, have to make sure you clean under them because they can harbor infection, bacteria, viruses. Right? Remember that there are possibilities of having asymptomatic carriers, typhoid variant. And the reason why we have this slide specifically is, depending upon where you are and where you go, you might be the only person that can actually go and inspect the little food area where they're making the food for all the soldiers. Right? So it's going to be up to you. You're going to have to go look at temperatures of food. You're going to have to go look at how they cook it, how hygienic they are. Do they have running water? Are they washing their hands really well? Using gloves. Right? Do they have a freezer? Not have a freezer. Is a freezer at the appropriate temperature? Well, guess what? Lieutenant Gutierrez had no freaking clue because we didn't learn this stuff at PA school. So I had to go look in the handbook, right? Because this is one of the jobs that we end up having to do when we go back home. So things to keep in mind when we talk about public health, as far as making sure that food safety is taken care of, because you're taking care of the troops, right? Taking care of the overall population. You want to make sure they don't get sick. Now, the use of foods from unapproved sources, your choice. Okay? Most of the time, they will tell you from higher, do not eat any of the local food. I will tell you, Captain Gutierrez, hey, can we have some of that local food? I have no zipper. I think you'll be all right. Right? But you talk to your commander. In this case, I had a really cool commander. He's like, yeah, you think it's okay? We trusted the folks across the way there. We sent 2 folks over to watch them cook. They watched them cook, and then they brought all the food over. And we had some local food. Yeah. Depends on your command, depends on higher headquarters. It depends on what you got in your pocket to be able to take care of folks. People get sick. Right? But, hey, use of foods from unapproved sources are generally not good if you're not quite sure. All right? Because you don't know where it came from. Here's a whole bunch of high-risk foods. Milk and dairy products, partially cooked raw meat, raw, leafy vegetables. Okay? So all these things here can relate back to the things that we've already talked about. Listeria, Salmonella, E. coli, 015787. Right? Can't go back Mycobacterium staph, Bacillus cereus, Clostridium perfringens, Clostridium botulinum, Shigella, Vibrio cholera. All these things are part of this high-risk food thing that you see here. It can be spread by any of those bacteria that we just mentioned. All right. So keep in mind how things can be transmitted to folks. Okay, types of food illnesses, foodborne infections, food intoxication, and toxin-mediated infection. Right? So foodborne infection definition basically is illness caused by eating food that contains a live pathogenic microorganism. What that microorganism is, could be bacterial, could be viral, could be fungal, could be a parasite, could be a bunch of stuff. Examples for that would be salmonella, or listeria, campylobacter, or norovirus. Remember, those guys usually take several hours to days before they kick in. Okay? Food infection, food illness. Versus food intoxication. So for food intoxication, we'll generally also call that one food poisoning. Okay? And that definition is illness caused by consumption of toxins, some sort of poison, right? Or preformed toxin, okay? Already produced by bacteria in the food that you eat. Okay? And in all reality, bacteria generally do not need to be alive in the food we consume. Okay? They can do it status function. Examples of that one could be Staph aureus, could be Clostridium botulinum, could be Bacillus cereus, the emetic form. Okay? This one is one that has more of the rapid onset, right? It can be anywhere between 1 to 6 hours or so. Because then you have your toxin mediated, right? That's the one where the illness caused by eating food that's contaminated by live bacteria which grow in your intestines, and then it produces toxins. Okay. Those are kind of bad ones, right? That's Clostridium perfringens, that's Shigella, that's ETEC, right? Traveler's diarrhea. That one usually takes long. That's usually 8 to 24 hours. Because it's got to get into your system. Whatever your acid in your stomach doesn't kill, continues to process through your intestinal tract, and then it has to grow, right? So it needs a little bit of time. This is some of the stuff we just talked about. The curved food infection occurs when food contains pathogens or microorganisms grow in the intestines, and then it causes the problem. Okay. Slightly longer duration period, approximately 12 hours here. Right? Diarrhea, cramping, fever, common. Okay. And here's a bunch of examples. Okay. The most common viral agent is usually Hep A. Okay. Usually Hep A, norovirus, and rotavirus are the probably the 3 most common viral causes of food infection. Here's your food intoxication. It occurs when food containing preformed toxins are eaten, causing illness. Right. So food intoxication, that also includes chemicals. Right? So when folks are cleaning, they may spray stuff on your table, they may spray stuff on the tables in the back where the food's being prepared, and some of it may get onto your food, or residue may be left on the table where your food picks it up. That'd be some of the chemical contamination that you may encounter when we talk about food intoxication. And here it also talks about naturally occurring plant or seafood, because there's one called strobrid, and we'll talk about it later. And that one is very similar to an allergic reaction, but it's more of a histamine reaction caused by leaving some of those dark-scaled fish and not putting them in appropriate temperature and leaving them out. So here, shorter incubation period, approximately 1 to 6 hours, nausea, vomiting, cramping, no fever. And here's some examples of the food intoxication: Staph aureus and B. cereus and big ones. Clostridium botulinum, seafood toxins are on there. And now we're going to talk about toxin-mediated infection, causing food containing live pathogenic microorganisms or and then colonizes your intestine and produces toxins. And there's just typically longer than intoxication, but shorter than classic, right? That's the one that's usually done about 8 to 24 hours. And there's a couple of examples there at the bottom. Just remember, for toxin-mediated viruses, don't usually cause toxic problems. This one we're going to kind of sort of jump around as we continue to move forward, but this is for you to look at, things to think about whenever you're sitting in your clinic and you're seeing folks that are coming in for multiple GI problems, and they tell you, oh yeah, I just ate at a mess hall. Hey, I just ate at the mess hall too. I did too. And you got a bunch of them. So hey, think about, maybe it's a possible outbreak. So what do you need to do? You need to detect a possible outbreak. That's you seeing that trend of people coming into your office, right, with very similar symptoms from the same location. Okay? Defining and finding the cause. Like, hey, if you tell me it's from the same location, then okay, we have a probable cause. Right? Then you generate your hypothesis about the likely source. Like, okay, well, what did you eat? And what did you eat? What did you eat? Figure out if they all eat the same stuff. Right? And then you can test our hypothesis, and you can point out the contamination, you can control the outbreak, and you can decide if the outbreak's over or not, but it's not going to be you. Once you get to, we'll say, number 2, you really need to call public health, and public health will do the rest of this stuff for you. It's not you doing this. Now, if you are downrange and you are it, then you may be doing some of this, because if you got a whole bunch of people that are sick, the only place they can eat is there. What there did they eat? You need to go over there and figure out if that's okay, if they're preparing it okay, if they're handling it okay, right? Because you don't want anyone else to get sick. Right? So, things that you may have to do. Here's the first one. Here's more of a definition. Okay? Must involve 2 or more people who eat a common food which is confirmed through laboratory analysis as a source of the illness. Now, things that we remember when it says 2 or more people, it's 2 or more people that are not in the same household. Okay? The reason why we don't want to involve count 2 people in the same household is because they interact. Okay? They interact. And it might be just the one thing in their house that caused the problem. Right? We're not talking about an individual. That's what we do as providers. We do individuals. We're looking at it from wearing the hat of public health. So the definition includes more than one person. 2 generally should be from different households. Right? Because at least we know it's not one single thing that may be in that one person's house. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay? But we do have exceptions. We do have exceptions. Exceptions here would be a single case of botulism or chemical poisoning. All right? Why? That's extremely important because it's going to kill somebody. All right? That's going to kill somebody, especially if somebody else eats it. All right? Botulism is fine. Canned foods that are not done properly. And they will tell you contact preventive medicine ASAP. They're the ones that are going to be really dealing with it. It's not going to be you. Okay? But you are that first line that's going to find it in order to report it. Okay? Responding to the outbreak, right? Define case of presumption, diagnosis. Again, you. Right? Those guys are the ones that are coming to you to figure out what's going on so that you can, continue to feed information to public health. You're that person. If you're seeing that increased number of cases for the same reason, or if you're asking the appropriate questions coming from the same location that they've eaten at. Okay? And that should kind of sort of trigger you, right? Now, from here, it says outbreak. You guys remember that definition of outbreak? Covered a little earlier in this block. No?
Different household?
No. I said outbreak. I didn't say definition of this. Right? So that outbreak one was a big one, right? The sudden increase in the number of cases of disease in a specific location or specific population. Right? That's your outbreak. Versus your epidemic, which is the next level up. Right? The next level up goes to community, region, country. Right? In this case, just talking outbreaks, just your local area, right? Just your small population. Okay? So remember definitions for public health. This is the key for public health. Definitions and math. Okay. So here we got some preformed toxins, nausea, vomiting, after preformed toxins, ingestion. Usually begins within 6 hours, right? Duration of illness usually less than 24. So for most of these, they're usually self-limiting. Okay? And it depends on the proper storage or the processing of the whole. A lot of times, especially when we talk about bacillus cereus, we just leave food laying out and it's staying out at room temperature, which is not good, right? And here you've got some examples of certain pharynges, bacillus cereus, and scromboid. Scromboid we didn't talk about. Usually it starts in fish like tuna, mackerel, mahi, maybe some sardines or anchovies if that's what you like. Those are the kind of fish that if not refrigerated or put into appropriate temperature can end up spreading some of those preformed seafood toxins. Okay. And they're not, the toxins for those guys are generally histamine based. And we'll talk about when we get to that point. Okay. So here they've got Clostridium perfringens, right? Cooking cause of food poisoning in the U.S. Common. Cooking kills existing growing cells, but not necessarily the spores, right? So the spore is the portion of the Clostridium that is outside your body that is what keeps it surviving until you ingest it. Once you ingest that spore, it gets nice and warm in your body, it starts hatching, right? That's where it starts causing all those problems. So if cooked food is not properly served or refrigerated, spores grow and produce new cells. Okay? That's generally what causes most of this problem. Okay? That's what causes that enterotoxin. Now, big things, diarrhea and abdominal cramps develop suddenly within 6 to 24 hours, typically 8 to 12, it's the bigger one. Usually no fever or vomiting. Not passed from one person to another, right? So not contagious. Nice. Now, here's the thing with Clostridium perfringens. You need to make sure that you do at least 2 samples, and if there's more than one person, you need to do more than 1 sample per person so that you can compare. Alright? Okay, bacillus cereus. Remember the emetic form, not the diarrheal form. Right? The emetic form is one that's already preformed, so when it gets into your gut, usually 1 to 6 hours later, on average, it's just going to make you throw up. Okay? Remember, for diarrheal, for the diarrheal portion of bacillus cereus, it's usually 8 to 16 hours. Right? Because it's got to develop further on into your gut. So here, caused by food cooked for a time and temperature is insufficient to kill spores. Right? So remember, if there are spores, some spores cannot be killed by heat. Some spores cannot be killed by heat. Toxins not inactivated by later reheating. Okay, there you go. Here, nausea, vomiting 1 to 5 hours after consumption, difficulty to distinguish from other short-term bacterial foodborne intoxications, because generally the stuff goes away within a day. Usually less than 24 hours, and you're better. Right? Nothing that we haven't already talked about, right? Okay, scromboid. This one we have not talked about. Alright. So this one says results from eating inappropriately stored or processed fish. Right? So as they catch them and they're not putting them in the storage bin within an appropriate amount of time, here the more common ones, the tuna, mackerel, mahi-mahi, bluefish, okay? They end up spoiling. Okay? And if they spoil, that's when bad stuff starts converting inside their bodies. Okay? The bacteria in the fish convert to histidine. And as the histidine continues to go, okay, it'll convert to histamine. Right? So when somebody eats it, they get a histamine reaction. Histamine state is heat stable. So heat is not going to kill that histamine that's in that already spoiled fish. So once you eat that histamine, what do histamines do? Right? They cause facial flushing, they cause itching, they may cause some nausea and vomiting. Right? It's like they're breaking out. Right? That's just a histamine reaction. That's what it is. Generally self-limiting, resolves within 10 to 12 hours, but what are you going to get for it? Right? If it's a histamine reaction, what are you going to get? An antihistamine, right? This makes sense. Usually you give them that antihistamine, depending on how severe it is, right? If you feel like, okay, you can't breathe, then go ahead and give them an EpiPen. But again, a lot of folks confuse this with an allergic reaction to seafood. It's not an allergic reaction, it's a histamine reaction. And it's because it's bad fish. Here's your norovirus. Okay, fecal oral, person to person, aerosolized by vomit, contaminated surfaces. Okay. Nothing that we haven't done. One of the most common causes of viral gastroenteritis that we have. Okay. We found in a whole bunch of different environments. Found in kitchens, right? Food handlers, people that congregate in a bunch of places. Right? What do we say? Cruise ships, right? Cruise ships. Okay. Remember, this is an RNA virus. So down there where it says testing via polymerase chain reaction, that's talking overall PCR. In which case, for testing this stool sample PCR would be RT-PCR. Okay? So we would be testing the stool sample RT-PCR. Do we generally do that? No. Because this thing usually resolves pretty quickly. Okay? No time, usually by the time they come see you, they're already getting done. So nothing to really do. Problem is that this happens in big giant groups. Right? So now you're going to have probably an outbreak. No standardized validated laboratory test for detecting norovirus in food. We don't know if the food has it. It's part of the problem. Here it says except for shellfish. Right? Shellfish, more so because some of them, a lot of them, are filter feeders. And because they're filter feeders, they're able to harbor some other virus inside their body, so they can pull some of that out and they can actually send it off to the lab. Okay. Here it says obtain viruses from swabs. Highly variable, right? You can't count on that because depending upon what the surface is that you're going to swab, you can have a whole bunch of different things in it. Especially if people try to clean them, they'll have some of that stuff which really interrupts your swab and keeps you from growing anything that's useful. Okay, so when we talk about norovirus, we talk about those big giant places, right? Say cruise ship outbreaks, daycare, nursing home outbreaks. Do we always have the ability to do testing on everybody? Right? How do we do testing on someone when the cruise ship is telling us that they have a norovirus outbreak? We don't. Okay? We go according to the signs and symptoms. Right? Does it get better within 24, 48 hours? Yes or no? Right? So we have two criteria that we'll talk about. One is the Kaplan criteria, the other one is the Lively criteria. Kaplan criteria is usually what public health uses as a whole, right? To say, okay, this big giant group probably has norovirus, okay? And they have to meet all of these criteria, okay? So a mean illness duration of 12 to 60 hours, mean incubation period of 24 to 48 hours. Vomiting in more than 50% of the affected individuals, right? Because now we're talking mass, right? We're not talking one person. And no bacterial pathogens are identified from stool samples. You must meet all 5 of those criteria, or 4 of those criteria, in order to say that a group has or does not have. That's usually not necessarily done by us, it's usually done by public health. But this is a way. This one is usually used for larger outbreaks, such as cruise ships. All right? Now, this isn't the only one that we have. Now, if this is all positive, it's not necessarily yes, they have it. Okay? For this, just like the other one, it is highly suggestive that they do. It is just going based against a lot of the common things that you would find for norovirus. Now, the next one that we have is the lively criteria. Now, the difference between these is this one has a little bit more, right? This one has 7 criteria, but this one is usually used more in healthcare settings. Okay? Here it says associated common sources, cruise ships, restaurants, buffet, nursing homes, or communal bathrooms. But this one is usually used more so in healthcare settings like nursing homes. Vice, the Kaplan criteria is usually used when people are away from more medical places. Okay. So here you've got vomiting greater than 50% of affected individuals. Same as the other one, right? Short incubation period, 12 to 48 hours, nothing different. Duration of illness, 12 to 60 hours. Large group affected. That's the reason why we're doing this. Right? Rapid spread in close environments, no bacterial pathogens in stool, okay? Or associated with common sources. Okay? If you meet all of those, you are highly suggestive of norovirus. Okay? If you don't meet any of them, or you only meet 2 or 3 of them, that does not mean that you don't have norovirus. Okay? Just because you don't meet all the criteria does not mean that you don't have norovirus. By meeting all the criteria, that just makes it highly suggestive that you do. Okay. Still need to do a bunch of testing to figure out if you do. This is just a real quick snapshot for them to figure out, yes, is this a possible outbreak or not? Okay. That's all this is. Okay. Norovirus prevention and control, key. Persist in the environment for days to weeks. Why? Because we shed norovirus after we're done. Right? You got to remember that. Hand washing in soap and water is one of the keys for this prevention. Right? It's probably the most effective means of controlling this. Here it says alcohol-based sanitizer is less effective than norovirus and does not have because it does not have a lipid envelope, right? So if you remember, alcohol sanitizers break down the lipid envelope on the outside of pathogens, and that is how it kills it. This does not have it. Okay? This does not have a lipid envelope or a lipid outside shell for that alcohol sanitizer to break and kill. So that's why alcohol does not work very well for norovirus prevention. It says the best is hand washing. Okay, the best is hand washing. Now the last surface there says, the last bullet there says, bleach surface disinfection must have contact for at least 5 minutes. That needs to be a 1.5 to 7.5% water to bleach solution that you can make at home. Just take it and wipe stuff down, and you just gotta let it dry. Okay, don't wipe it dry, let it dry. That usually will kill the norovirus with a bleach solution. Okay, so it's serious. Now we're talking long incubation, right? So now we're talking the diarrheal form. Okay. Like cooking may prevent toxin formation by killing some of the bacteria before they grow any toxin. But if it's still in spore form, not gonna do anything. The spore's gonna make it down your gut, and then it's gonna hatch, and then it's gonna cause you some problems. Okay. Things to remember with the diarrheal form of bacillus. Okay. Associated with sauces, vegetables, dairy products. Okay. We don't have rice on here, but it's still starchy. Okay. Starchy foods. Feed liable enterotoxins can be destroyed by cooking, but it's not going to kill your spores. Okay. Eat the 16-hour incubation period. Predominantly what you have is watery diarrhea, GI pain, and usually get better within a day. Really easy, right? That's a difference than we don't already know. Salmonella type. Okay. So the USDA did a study back in 2005 for Salmonella non-typhus. It cultured 4,000 random samples of meat, including chicken, pork, and beef. 5.7 and 33% of chicken samples yielded Salmonella. That's stuff that's coming out, that's coming to you as a consumer. If this stuff does not get refrigerated appropriately and stays within that danger zone of 40 to 140 degrees, bacteria can double within 20 minutes, which means if anywhere in that chain that thing has not been taken care of appropriately, you could already be developing Salmonella bacteria. This is in everything from milk to pig's ear and dog food. Okay? Milk products left out of the refrigerator. Okay? Canned goods, previously cooked foods left out there sitting on the counter. I've done that a whole bunch of times. Luckily I haven't died yet. Right? Uncooked egg products, poultry, meat, contaminated water. We have this stuff in a lot of different places. But then again, we can also get from some animal reservoirs there, directly in contact with animals and their environments. Okay. This is an enterocolitis issue. Right? This is an enterocolitis issue, so it affects your small intestine or your large intestine. Okay. Incidence rate, highest in children less than 5 years of age. Usually for us, we usually get better pretty quick, but little kids usually can't tolerate this yet until they get a little older. Fecal shedding of infectious organisms persists for days to weeks. And just like norovirus, even after you get better, you're still spreading. And you just don't know. Hence, washing your hands is extremely important. Usually you get better within 4 to 7 days. And this is self-limiting, so. Prevention and control, no antimicrobial treatment recommended for uncomplicated gastroenteritis. This is a big one that people are always going back and forth on, is if they should wash their poultry before cooking. So according to the CDC and the FDA, they do not recommend you having to wash your poultry before you cook it. Okay? What they say is you washing it doesn't necessarily get everything off, number one. Number two, cross-contamination, you start spreading that stuff everywhere, because if you don't wipe everything clean after you're done, possibly spread it to wherever else you're cooking within that same little area. And then their overall thought process is, look, if you're cooking it to the appropriate temperature, you shouldn't have any more salmonella or bacteria. So they don't recommend you washing your poultry. Okay? Cooking poultry at 165 degrees for at least 15 seconds. Okay? So once you hit 165, what the standard says from the CDC is that it only needs to be there for a couple of seconds in order for it to kill the salmonella. Okay? So as long as you make it to 165 degrees, cooking your poultry, you should be okay. Campylobacter, right, carried normally in intestinal tracts of many animals, right? So contaminated foods, especially undercooked chicken, right? Raw chicken, and spread it to us, it's gonna cause us gastroenteritis, right? Affect our gut, right? Other things that can spread it, water or unpasteurized milk, animal contacts. So here it's got highest risk to travelers in Africa and South America. Stuff can happen in a lot of different places, not just there, but highest risk. All right. Incubation period is usually about 2 to 5 days. Right? And here it says infectious doses less than 500 organisms can cause you problems. All right. There is no vaccine available, usually self-limiting, but if somebody really needs something, you can give them some azithromycin or erythromycin. Foodborne illnesses may not cause predominant nausea or vomiting. Kind of mentioned that earlier, right? Not all foodborne illnesses cause nausea or vomiting as their predominant symptom. May happen later, may happen once, but it may not necessarily be the predominant reason why they're coming to see you. Remember, some of these signs and symptoms can vary, right? And it's really dependent on the pathogen, right? Whether it's bacterial versus viral versus parasitic versus toxic. Okay? So these things can present in a lot of different ways, okay? So what are you gonna do to control this stuff? Okay. It involves a series of coordination actions, right? You need to identify and contain it, right? Gotta be those patients coming to see you, and you like, okay, what happened? And you have another one, and you try to get that full story, right? That's where that HPI becomes extremely important. So once you get that information, then you can feed it to your public health folks, all right? And then they can work through there on the rest of it. Okay? But in that interim, you're the one that's detecting it, and you're the one that's technically confirming it because the patient came to see you, right? And all that stuff, you feed public health. The other aspect of what you're going to do is you're going to provide all that medical support for them, right? And then you can reinforce some of the preventive stuff when you start talking to public health and saying, hey, this is where I think it's coming from. You need to let them know that they need to do X, Y, Z. Okay? But you are literally in the clinic and you're the one that really should be supporting that patient. Personal protective measures. What do you say is the best way to take care of this stuff? What? Hand wash. Correct. And it doesn't matter where you're at, even if you're falling forward. Okay? If you're talking mass, hand washing. Most important thing. Okay? Most important thing. Hand washing. Right? We talked about, hey, make sure that that person that hired that cook got educated appropriately. Yes, hand wash after he goes from the bathroom, right? Here's a couple other reasons why some folks may not do it, right? After changing a baby's diaper, make sure you change it, right? Make sure you wash your hands after you change it. Okay? When you're taking out the cat litter box, right? You don't want any toxo. Make sure you wash your hands, right? Extremely important. So here at the bottom, we've got no added health benefits for consumers using soap containing antibacterial. Right? So back in 2016, the FDA banned triclosan and triclocarban. But those were the antibacterials that most antibacterial soaps were using. Okay? And the deal was that they could not prove that this was better than using regular soap, and it did not show any long-term use. So they banned it. Okay. Now, if you look at some of the soaps that are out there right now, right, like Dial as an example, one of the biggest sealing features on there, it says antimicrobial soap. Okay. So there's another thing out there called benzyl chloride. We call it BZK. That is another type of antibacterial. And that is what they're using currently in some of the soaps right now that are still antibacterial. Okay? Those are called quaternary ammonium compounds. Now, why are we still using them? We are still using them because the manufacturers have requested that they get more time so that they can show some safety data. All right? What the FDA came out and said, hey, we're still, the quaternary ammonium compounds are still being investigated, so we need more for further testing. So the companies, the manufacturers have requested that, FDA has granted it, so until they finish doing that, we will still have that. Now, has the antimicrobial soap stuff really worked? In our reality, no. It has not shown any better efficacy than just using hand washing with soap, standard soap. Now, look at the bottom there, we do have exceptions. The exceptions are us, okay? You, me, anyone that works in the healthcare system, okay? We are the exception. We are allowed to use the antibacterial soaps because of the patients that we encounter and the things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. So we are the ones that are authorized to use antibacterial soaps. All right? And then we'll call it quits here, and then we'll pick this up tomorrow. All right? Anybody have any questions?